I once had a landlord say, sure, you can rent it out short term. Then, because the lease didn't include permission, it ended up being a total mess once I listed it. I basically had to transition to midterm rentals after the first few months. If you're doing Airbnb arbitrage and not using the right lease addendum, you're basically building your business on a handshake, and we all know how that can end. In this video, I'll walk you through the exact clauses we use in our addendum. This will help to protect yourself legally, stay compliant, and give your business room to breathe, all without the stress of the landlord pulling the plug. Hey there, welcome back to the channel. If you're into Airbnb investing, rental arbitrage, or building cash flowing side hustles, you are in the right spot. Today's topic is huge, and we're talking about the arbitrage addendum, what it is, why it matters, and what to include so your landlord is on the same page. By the end, you'll know exactly what to ask for and how to protect your business, especially in the world where laws can change fast. Quick disclaimer before we dive in, I'm not a lawyer, and this video is not legal advice. I'm just sharing what's worked for me and others in the short-term rental space. Before using any of these tips or clauses in your lease, make sure you consult with a licensed attorney who understands your local laws. Number 1, subleasing permission breakdown. This is your legal green light. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. Let me tell you exactly why this matters. Not all landlords are okay with random guests, but many are fine with traveling nurses, corporate guests, or other professionals. Be very clear in your language. You'd want to include something like tenant is permitted to sublease the unit to vetted traveling professionals, including but not limited to healthcare workers, contractors, and corporate personnel. Or if you're somebody that isn't planning on just doing corporate stays, make sure that you include that you can host all different types of traveling professionals or all different types of travelers, because that may matter. A lot of the times when people are pitching Airbnb arbitrage to a landlord, they're basically saying that they will rent it out to traveling professionals, nurses, contractors. We've all heard the same pitch basically. But the reality is, if you're telling them that that's the only type of guest that you're gonna host, you have to be able to stand by it. If it's not, then you need to make sure that you're very clear in that language, or just say that you're going to rent to all different types of guests. Because again, if they think that you're only gonna be renting to doctors and nurses, and then they find out that you have different types of individuals from all walks of life, that isn't a problem. It shouldn't be a problem, but you'd be surprised with how many landlords may try to turn the tables. Number 2 is you want to get approval for short-term stays under 30 days. Now, the reason I say this is because a lot of the times in addendums, people will put that they want to Airbnb, they want to rent it out to traveling professionals, and the owner will agree to that. But let's say in most of the clauses or most of the leases, they're saying that the person has to be there for at least a minimum of 30 days. So you want to make sure that your specific clause states that you can rent for under 30 days. So these are going to be stays anywhere from 1 day to a week to 3 weeks or over a month. It's totally up to your discretion, but you have to understand many leases ban hotel-like stays. You need explicit permission for guest stays under 30 days. And of course, like I just said, why it matters, in some cities, this is considered a short-term rental, and that could clash with zoning rules, and it can clash with regulations, and you don't want the landlord blaming you if the city cracks down. So one of the important things that you're going to want to include is tenant may host guests for periods of less than 30 consecutive days. Technically, if you really think about it, if you're gonna be the one doing short-term rentals and the landlord is just being the landlord, they shouldn't necessarily have to worry about short-term rental regulations. That's kind of your expertise. But I would assume, and I would think that it'd probably be beneficial for anyone who's associated with the property, whether they're the landlord or the renter, if you are planning on doing short-term rentals or your tenant is planning on doing short-term rentals, to at least have some type of familiarity. Because at the end of the day, the owner ultimately is responsible for the well-being of the property as a whole. So if for whatever reasons the city cracks down and it falls back on the owner, well, yeah, they may try to come after the renter, but the owner also had a duty to understand what all went into short-term rentals within the city. Hopefully you guys are kind of getting what I'm saying here, but the reality is, it is still up to you as the short-term rental host to make sure that you're not doing things under the table. A landlord can say yes all day long, but at the end of the day, if you don't have permission from the city's ultimately going to come and crack down on you. So you just want to make sure that you're putting that in your clause, but then you're also doing your own due diligence before you even get to this point in the lease to make sure that you're eligible for short-term rentals and able to get a permit. And of course, one of the most important is permission to list on third-party sites such as Airbnb, Vrbo, etc. Even if you're allowed to sublease, some landlords don't want to see their unit online, so you want to avoid this confusion. You want to include that the tenant is permitted to market the property on third-party booking platforms such as Airbnb, Vrbo, Furnish Finder, Booking.com, and similar services. Language in contracts in general can be very vague. It can be very confusing, can be hard to understand. People can interpret them differently. So it's up to you to make sure you don't have to go and adjust the entire rental agreement. That's not what we're telling you to do. What we're saying is, in most cases, the best thing that we've seen a lot of different operators do is just create an addendum. It's usually a one-pager. It includes these provisions, these paragraphs that basically can override those other ones, that basically breaks down all the main things that are most important when you're about to lease the property for short-term rentals. Now, the very last provision that we like to add is a 60-day opt-out clause. Now, this is specifically in the event that there's another pandemic, or if they legally ban or prevent you from running your short-term rental business in the city. I know a lot of people want a get-out-of-free card if for whatever reason the property isn't profitable, or if it is no longer performing, or maybe you're having trouble with the landlord. But most of the time, we just include a 60-day opt-out clause for those specific reasons that prevent us from running our business successfully. Now, if it's not profitable, if it's something where you and the landlord aren't getting along, usually you can just break the lease. You may have to pay a little bit more, but the reality is, you set yourself up for success by doing your due diligence prior. Landlords can sometimes feel like they're being left high and dry, kind of with very little time to scramble and find another tenant if you were to put in, let's just say, a 30-day clause or break the lease last minute and without any type of lengthy notice. So I think that it is important that you guys determine what you think would be best, whether it just be the 60-day opt-out clause for pandemics and legal bans, or if you want to include it for any reason. 60-day clause for if you want to leave just because you feel like it. Just because you no longer want the unit and you want to end it before the lease term is up. Whatever it is, you guys can work that out, but most of the time we're just including the opt-out only in the event of another pandemic or some type of legal ban. So this would have definitely saved people thousands during COVID, because without this, you're stuck paying full rent even if the city bans short-term rental stays or puts a stay-at-home order in place. So what you would want to include is, in the event of a government-mandated short-term rental ban, pandemic restrictions, or similar public safety event, tenant may terminate this lease with 60 days notice and no penalty. So that still gives you time to finish out any type of bookings, also determine how you're gonna go about next steps with finding another property or where to put the furniture if you wanna sell it off. Then it also gives the owner adequate time to be able to find a new tenant. So everyone is basically taken care of in that sense. So I just want to make sure that I add that in, because it is important that you more so uphold that ethics portion, or just the courtesy of simply letting somebody know that you're no longer going to be moving forward and it doesn't make sense for your business. So just wanted to make sure I preface that, but that is one of the most important things that you can do. And here's a pro tip, that you might want to add a line in this addendum that supersedes conflicting language in the lease terms. And this matters because some leases will contradict your addendum. So you want to make sure that the addendum wins. So what you would want to include in this, I'm sure that most of you guys, if you've ever looked at a traditional residential lease, usually it says that nobody besides the person on the lease can stay in the property, or they can't have any other guests in there for, more than 7 days at a time. Or they'll say specifically that they cannot sublease the property. Doesn't matter if it's for Airbnb, if it's just on a regular booking site, if it's on their own website, it just says that they can't sublease. So you guys are usually gonna find that in most residential agreements. So you just wanna make sure that your addendum wins in this event. So what you could include is, in the event of a conflict between this addendum and the standard lease, the terms of this addendum shall prevail. Something along those lines. Now, here's a couple common pitfalls that we think might be beneficial for you to understand. Mistake number one is just getting verbal permission but never writing it down. I've said this once, I'll say it again. I preach it on almost all of my videos where we talk about anything legalities, but just having contracts for everything. Have contracts with everyone, even your mother, literally to a T, because at the end of the day, landlords can change, owners can change, management can change, individuals can change. And if you don't have anything in writing, that could come back to bite you in the ass. So that is number one. Mistake number two is using vague language. Like I said, people can interpret things a million different ways. If it came down to it in court, which ultimately you want to think about down the line, like worst case scenario, you guys going to court and then bringing up some type of contract dispute, would be using vague language where it doesn't fully make sense. and it's not clear and concise, which you want it to be. So short-term rental can mean different things to different people. So you just want to make sure that you're being very, very clear, like I had said about the other provisions, where you say exactly what you're doing, where you're putting the listing up, how long you're going to be hosting individuals, under what amount of days stays, things like that. And then last thing, mistake number 3 is not planning for a shutdown scenario like COVID or a city ordinance change. At the end of the day, laws are always changing. There are a ton of cities that have cracked down or are still cracking down on Airbnb and short-term rentals alike. So you just want to make sure that you prepare yourself for that. Now, if you're in a city that already has an ordinance and already has a change, that's usually great. Most of the time they won't change it, but in the event that they do, just to be safe, you want to have some type of clause like that in the addendum. Now, how can you avoid these common pitfalls is number 1, always use a written addendum. You want to define everything clearly: guests, platforms, opt-out terms, and ultimately, if you feel necessary, have a lawyer review it if possible. Again, this is not legal advice, just experience-based tips. Now that we went over the common pitfalls, let's talk about a couple of success tips. Here's some quick wins, and although we don't recommend that you use ChatGPT to run your entire business, you could use AI to draft an addendum at the very, very minimum. You can send the addendum as part of your initial negotiation instead of waiting until lease signing. So that way the owner at least has an idea of what to expect that they'll be signing once you guys get to the closing table. And then of course, here's keys to long-term success. Building a landlord relationship based on transparency. Being very clear that you are going to be renting it as a short-term rental on Airbnb under 30-day stays, and you want the ability to exit in the event that you can no longer run your business effectively. All of those things should be totally fine with the landlord as long as they understand what they're agreeing to. If you go ahead and bring up all these things at the very last second when you guys are about to sign the lease, they can feel as if they're being kind of pushed into a corner, and you guys don't want to build a relationship just based off of that. So it's good to be upfront and honest at the very beginning so you don't have to explain yourself later. And of course, you always want to be ready with documentation when city laws change, because they are always changing. You want to be able to show them any type of changes that are made that could prevent you from effectively running your business. And then lastly, treat every lease like a business partnership. At the end of the day, that's what it is. You want to have a relationship with this landlord. If they're an investor and they ever have additional properties, those could always be yours up for grabs. Or who knows, if everything goes really well and the owner decides that they want to sell down the line, you could be the first person that they call, and the property could end up being yours. You could buy an asset, build wealth, and so on and so forth. So before you sign your next lease, make sure you've got these clauses locked into your addendum. It's the difference between a thriving Airbnb business and a legal nightmare. So of course, want a copy of the exact addendum we use to get landlord approval for Airbnb Arbitrage? We put together a free download with all the key clauses we discussed in this video. Just click the link below, drop your email in the link, and we'll send it straight to your inbox. It's a great starting point you can review with your attorney to make sure you're covered. Lastly, if you're looking to scale your STR business, check out our free platform where you can view tons of deals, all pre-approved for short-term rentals and Airbnb arbitrage. It's linked below. Thanks for watching. If this video helped, drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and let us know if you've run into any issues like this in your business. And remember, clear contracts make great partnerships. See you on the next one.